that was what made the King of Diamonds so unique, is that it was so peculiar, so invasive, and that it left scars on people.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the jewels, it was the mark that he left because he was in their domicile, in their most private places.
Right.
So to me, that's what made the whole case so intriguing.
Absolutely.
And worth looking into.
Yeah.
Welcome to Learning from Leaders, a podcast from Southwestern Medical Foundation where we dive into a world of wisdom, mentorship, and innovation, exploring the insights and life lessons of seasoned community and business leaders. I'm Michael McMahon, President and CEO of Southwestern Medical Foundation. I invite you to subscribe now and join us on this empowering journey of growth and leadership. Now, let's learn from the best and drive meaningful change together.
Welcome to another episode of Learning from Leaders. I'm your host, Lily Clark, and today we are so excited to speak with Rena Pederson, an acclaimed journalist and Pulitzer Prize-nominated author. Rena's latest book, The King of Diamonds, The Search for the Elusive Texas Jewel Thief, chronicles a gripping true crime story filled with intrigue and suspense. She has spent decades shaping narratives in journalism and continues to be a powerful voice in storytelling. Rena, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure.
So to get us started, tell us how you got into journalism. What made you so excited about storytelling from the beginning?
Well, they always say start small, learn the business. I started when I was in high school working for the San Angelo Standard-Times, my hometown paper in West Texas. I was just a teenager. I started out writing a column for teens and graduated from that to covering the official records, the births, the deaths, the most important things in the community, and crime, covering police. But I was too young to drive. I didn't have a driver's license or a car. And so the police would drive by the newspaper and honk. And I would grab my notepad and run out, get in the cop car, and go with them to whatever the crime of the moment was.
They just let you in the car?
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I remember the policeman that would often pick me up, his nickname was Twinkle Toes because he was pigeon-toed. And he was this great, big, burly guy. And I remember one time we went and fished out a body from the Concho River, and then he took me to get an orange crush with peanuts in it. It's not really what you want to have if you've seen a dead body in the river. But I realized over time how fortunate I was because while my friends were at the Dairy Queen, I had doing the local high school gossip, I was out fishing dead bodies out of the river. And I thought, how fun can it be? It doesn't get any better than that. And so I just always saw every story as a mystery to solve. Like I think all reporters in a way are detectives. So it came naturally. I grew up on Nancy Drew. You probably did too.
I did.
I even had a teacher in grade school, Mrs. Harvey. She had two sons, Donald and Ronald. And she brought all their Hardy Boys books to school. And if you finished your work on time, you could read the Hardy Boys. So I was surrounded by mysteries and then graduated from that to what I would call the harder stuff.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So you've covered a wide range of stories, local, national, international. What are some of the most memorable stories that you've covered?
Wow. I really have been so fortunate. The people that I've gotten to interview, it's such a range from Julia Child to Fidel Castro, who was surprisingly tall and charming, to Margaret Thatcher. You have to sit up straighter when you even think about Margaret Thatcher. But really, I think the most memorable, most impressive person I've interviewed was Aung San Suu Kyi, who was the Nobel Prize winner, who went back to Burma after going to Oxford to help bring democracy to Burma, and ended up, she and her party won the election, and she was arrested and put in prison or house arrest for most of the rest of her life, in and out, but she kept trying to rally the democracy movement and trying to mentor people. I was really fortunate that I was able to get in to interview her while she was under house arrest.
Wow.
If she walked into this room, you would feel her. She had so much character and poise that you would feel her presence. And I don't think I've felt that with very many other people I've interviewed. They've been interesting and memorable. When she walked in, I felt her charisma. I really did. She's back under arrest again. The military democracy was making inroads in Burma, and so the military took back over. And so she was arrested on some trumped up, ridiculous charge and thrown in the main prison there. The name of it is Insane, which is spelled Insein, but it is insane.
Yeah.
It is the worst, dankest prison, I think, in the world. So she'll be 80 next June.
Oh my God.
And not in great health. But the interesting is that the people she mentored are carrying on the fight, and they are making inroads against the army. I tell this story just so it'll be on people's agenda, because there's so many problems in the world, in the Middle East, everywhere, that people have kind of forgotten about Burma. But the latest of the situation is that China's playing this drama to their advantage. They're great believers in encirclement. There's a game called Go. It's a Japanese game. It has a different name in Chinese. But basically, the winner encircles the enemy. And that's what China's doing in Burma. And if we're not careful, in a not too far future, people will be saying, who lost Burma? If we don't wake up and pay more attention to it. The military put out the report recently that she had been released from prison and was under house arrest, but she's not in her house. So the question is, where is she? She's probably in a general's home. And to me, it's very insidious that they're basically holding her hostage, basically using her as a shield.
Wow.
And a hostage. And she's a Nobel Peace Prize winner. I don't think there's anywhere else in the world that there's a Nobel Peace Prize winner
Right.
who's under house arrest. And the people that she trained, some of whom came here to Dallas to train. The Bush Center
wow.
had a leadership program that was really significant. They brought dozens of young people from Burma to train them in leadership. And now they have returned to Burma. One of them that I met and was so impressed, she had been in prison herself for many years for writing a poem.
Huh.
And she now, they have a shadow government, and she is the foreign minister
Oh my gosh.
in their shadow
That's
government
fascinating.
dealing with the world. So whatever happens to Aung San Suu Kyi, she certainly does credit for being truly one of the bravest people in the world, I think. So
Remarkable.
I was privileged to
Wow.
get to interview her twice.
Wow.
Yeah. So that jumps out. It's a once in a lifetime thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Could you talk about how the landscape of journalism has changed over the course of your career?
Yeah, boy, has it. Well, I grew up in print journalism and was in print journalism most of my life. And it's dwindling before our eyes. I think the figures show that since 2005, 43,000 jobs have been lost in newspapers. More than 3,000 have gone out of business. The ones that are left are mostly a few big major papers, but they're struggling, and the rest are maybe community papers, which in a way was how papers started, but they're too small to keep track of national and international events. So there's really a gap there. So the print profession, I'll give you an example. I think the Morning News, their recent circulation figures, the Morning News print circulation's around 67,000. When I was there years ago, we were shooting for 1 million. We were going to catch up with the big papers in New York and Washington. The Sunday circulation was over 800,000. So you compare that to 67,000. The Fort Worth Star-Telegram, I think, is 37,000. The Austin paper is less than that. You think this is one of the fastest growing states, fastest growing regions in the country. Where are people getting their information? One good thing about the newspapers and print journalism, they're morphing into digital, as you know, and it's about the same as the print circulation for a lot of papers right now. Needs to grow bigger, is that people are getting their news from such a wide variety of sources.
Right.
To a certain extent, they're inundated, but they tend to gravitate to things that reinforce their beliefs rather than things that expose them to a variety of beliefs. So I think there's real reason for concern there. Who are the gatekeepers and what is their agenda?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you have written many books. Tell us about that moment when an idea comes to you. Like, how do you choose a topic? What is it like when that idea sparks?
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, they say there are no accidents, but my first book, What's Next, which is about women changing life, direction at midlife, was inspired by a fellow here in Dallas named Bob Buford, who wrote a book called Halftime about men changing direction at midlife to, instead of focusing on their business, to focus on making a positive difference in the world. So from counting money to counting contributions. And it was a wonderful book, and it changed the lives of a lot of men in Dallas who then said, what am I working so hard for? And they switched to working for a cause or community benefit. I told him, I said, you should do a sequel with women in it. There are no women in this book. And he said, why don't you? Well, you should never say that to me. Why don't you? Why don't you go to Burma? I will. And so I did. It was really a wonderful, life-changing thing for me to interview women who had changed their life. But when I think back, I was only in my 50s. People would come up and say, well, what's next for you? What are you going to do? And so here I am a couple of decades later when I'm doing something that I always wanted to do, which was to do more writing. When you're in a career, any career, the more you get promoted up, the further you get from the thing that you love, that you wanted to do. And I went from there. I was actually on Oprah for my first book. Yeah, it was my 15 minutes of fame. It was one of the few things I've done that impressed my children. I will say that. But I went on to pursue things that I just cared about. One was about women in faith. One was about an apostle whose story had been disguised and left out over the years. And I just kept getting led that direction. And then to Burma, to interview someone whose whole life made a difference. So I guess maybe I've fallen astray or wandered astray. Now I'm into true crime. But my very first book signing, it was so funny. A man came up to me afterward. It was at the DMA, being interviewed by your grandmother, Lee Cullum. And afterward, I'm signing books, and this man comes up, and he says, well, he said, this must be so exciting for you at your age. I was just stunned. I thought, how do I respond to that? I thought of something snippy to say, and then I thought, well, actually it is.
Yeah.
And I am enjoying it. And so he was absolutely right. This turns out this is my what's next, to do The King of Diamonds.
Okay, so I do want to turn to The King of Diamonds now.
Oh, okay.
I know that many of our listeners have read the book, loved the book. Would you mind giving, if anyone hasn't read it, just a brief synopsis? And importantly, I just want to know what really struck you about this idea when you first came across the story. How long have you been following it? And what was that moment where you said, I'm really going to dive into this?
Okay. Well, I heard about The King of Diamonds when I was a young reporter at UPI, right out of grad school. And I thought, well, that's fascinating. A jewel thief who stole millions from some of the wealthiest people in Dallas, but they couldn't catch him. And I kind of filed that away. I wasn't in a position to pursue it then, but I marinated on it, I guess you could say, for 50 years. and then I thought, I'm going to go back and I'm going to work on that. I'm going to see if I can find this thief. If I had known it would take 6 years, I'm not sure. I would have devoted 6 years of my life. But once I got into it, the story had many layers to it, that the more I dug, the more complex the case was. And it educated me. I had been covering Dallas for many years, everything but sports. Mm-hmm. And I thought I knew Dallas, but I learned things that surprised me about the layers of crime in the city that had been kept quiet. And I ended up deciding that it was important to have done the book so that people will be attuned to what's below the surface they're not looking for.
Yeah.
Does that kind of answer your question?
That does. It's really interesting. Without giving too much away, what can you tell us about the thief's life and just the mystery surrounding this jewelry heist?
Yes. Well, I think I could make a case that the King of Diamonds was the best jewel thief in U.S. history, not just because of the duration. It lasted an amazing length of time from the mid-50s to 1970s, so over 15 years. That's remarkable. That's never happened with a jewel thief before. Or the amount of money, which was approximately $6 million in today's dollars. There have actually been jewel thieves who've stolen more glamorous, bigger heists, like Murph the Surf stole the Star of India from the Museum of Natural History. But he got caught. Most of them get caught. The King of Diamonds did not get caught. The FBI was looking for him. Scotland Yard was looking for him, but he was never caught. Sooner or later, most jewel thieves have a pattern that gives them away, and they catch him. But the King of Diamonds evaded the police. He was so adept. He would climb up trees. He would climb across rooftops. He climbed in windows. He somersaulted out a window. He was a very agile, smart thief. He cased out every site. He always knew a way to get out if somebody bumped into him, which a couple of people did in the middle of the night. So he was just phenomenal. But the thing to me was not just the duration or the amount, was that there was something peculiar about this case. I'll give you 3 quick examples, if I may.
Please.
At the home of Margaret Hunt Hill, the daughter of oil man H.L. Hunt, she went to dinner with her husband. They got back. They're going to bed about 10 o'clock, not realizing that outside on the balcony outside their bedroom, the thief was waiting, and he sat there and smoked 3 cigarettes while they were getting ready to go to bed. So when think about how brazen that is.
Yeah.
And he could sense their breathing got regular and went to sleep. So he walked right by their beds to the dressing room, pulled out a drawer that had the jewels in it, so he knew where the jewels were, went down the interior stairs, walking past their teenage daughter's room, went downstairs to the kitchen and sat there, picked out jewels one by one, looking for exactly what he wanted. He was a very choosy thief, got thirsty, got a glass of water, had a glass of water, and slipped out the sliding door. And one of the things that so troubled her was not just the jewels. He got her grandmother's best pearls and some other things, but that it was so invasive. I mean, how would you feel going down to your kitchen in the dark if you thought somebody could be down there going through your jewels? So second example, Ruth Sharp Altshuler was going with her husband to the Church of Korean ball. It was after the JFK shooting, and she told her husband, she said, I'm so tired of crying. This has been so awful. Let's go to a party. So they were going to this party. It was her daughter's 15th birthday, she was 15 and it was her first date. And they told her, be sure and be home at 10 o'clock. She said, I will. So she gets in from her date at 10 o'clock and sits down, turns on the TV, and looks up and notices that the door to her parents' room is closed. And she thought, well, that's odd. It's usually open. She thought, gosh, did they beat me home from the party? And didn't pay it any mind, went to her bedroom, put on her pajamas, went to sleep. Of course, her parents came in later. And the next day, they got up and her jewels were gone, and they realized that the king was in their bedroom at the time their daughter was there.
Oh, my gosh.
Watching.
Chills.
Yeah, doesn't that give you creeps?
Yeah.
And then going to sleep. And then last example, Barbara Verrill went to dinner at a penthouse, some opera and theater supporters, got home around midnight. She's going up the stairs and she hears a click. Sounded like it came from the master bedroom. And she calls out to her husband and says, honey, have you locked up? And he says, yes, I am now. She says, good. She goes on up the stairs into the bedroom and looks around. Notices her closet door's a little open, so she goes over, looks in her closet, doesn't really see anything, closes the closet door, gets undressed, goes to bed. They have an early flight the next morning to go to Paris. She sleeps fitfully, wakes up and looks. Her closet door is wide open. So he was in her closet.
Oh, my gosh.
The whole time, and her jewels were gone. Now, that was particularly upsetting. When I interviewed her 50 years later, her voice trembled. And she said, I've never opened my closet door since then without thinking about it. Is somebody in the closet? Yeah. And so that was what made the King of Diamonds so unique, is that it was so peculiar, so invasive, and that it left scars on people.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the jewels. It was the mark that he left because he was in their domicile, in their most private places.
Right.
So to me, that's what made the whole case so intriguing
Absolutely.
and worth looking into.
Yeah. Could you tell us about your research process?
Oh, yeah. Well, it took a long time because it wasn't just one burglary. The police figured they had records on about 3 dozen. I figured there were at least 60 that I could document from interviewing people and what records they were in news stories. But there were probably about 100. So that's not just one case to look into. That's a lot of them to look at and see what you could glean. So I went to the library. You know, most detectives and detective books go to the bar. I went to the library, just old gumshoe work, and looked through the clip files and did a lot of work online with the library database things. I subscribed to several public record sites where I trolled through and looked up everything I could, tracked down policemen, tracked down victims or their descendants, and talked to them. The police did one very, very, very interesting thing. They didn't have DNA evidence back then. That didn't come till the 80s. This is the early 60s. So they couldn't have tested the cigarettes
Right.
that they found. But they came up with this idea to do a psychological profile because the lead cop in the case, Lieutenant Paul McCarran, fascinating guy, had gone to SMU to the MLA program, and he had a psychology professor that he thought was terrific and that he was inspired to do a psychological profile. Well, nobody had done that. The FBI didn't start their behavioral science office or bureau, I believe they call it, until the 1980s. So this is way
interesting.
ahead of their time.
Yeah.
And they had this psychologist, Dr. Robert Stoltz, look at all the cases, go out with the cops at night on patrol, and he did a psychological profile that turned out to be amazingly accurate in that he said it was a man in his early 30s. He was from a well-to-do family. He had good manners. If he had to step on a chair, for example, he would put a towel or something down on the chair. He put
Fascinating.
everything back
Yeah.
where it was. He was probably, from his family of means, he was well-dressed. People got a glimpse that he had on a sports jacket, that he was mama's boy because he had a penchant for women's jewelry. You add and he had a grudge. That was one thing Stoltz tipped him to, because sometimes if there were a pair of, let's say, 2 diamond earrings, he would just take one and spoil the set.
Wow.
Whereas a regular burglar would take both,
Yeah.
of course, increase the value. And so there was this perverse little
Mm-hmm.
element to it. And so I did, once I started interviewing people and building a list of suspects, like on TV, the murder board. I had my own with Post-its.
I would love to have seen that.
I should have taken a picture of it. I consulted a psychologist at SMU myself, and she was wonderful. And she helped me build another profile that I added to what the police said. For example, he might have been an opera lover because a large percentage of the victims were opera supporters. That he that he might have had a grudge, had a rejection in engagement. And there was one man that out of all the subjects that I considered that checked all the boxes. And so I thought, I think I found the man. I made the best case I could, but I left it open. I'm not God. I could have been wrong to say if it wasn't this person, who was it?
Right. So after that moment, were there periods of doubt that it might have been him? Or did you feel pretty confident from then on?
I felt pretty confident. And this was the person that the police thought was the thief, too. But unfortunately, most of the people from that time have passed away. There's no way to find out for sure. But, I'm okay with that because I think some things in life should be a mystery.
Yeah. What was the most challenging part of writing this book?
Oh, my. You can imagine with that many cases and suspects. I interviewed over 200 people, I think maybe as many as 250.
Wow.
So I had to develop this pretty extensive filing system, both in my computer and physical files. I got mysteriously hacked a couple of times, and so I had to just keep adding to the security on my computer system. So the challenging thing was the sheer volume of the cases and of the people and sorting it out. That just a lot of time saying, who do you believe? Who do you believe? It's, they often show in courtroom studies where they fake it that somebody comes in and assaults somebody, and then they interview the people in the class, and everybody has a different view about what happened. And that was the case in this. And the way of addressing that was just to find as many witnesses or contemporaneous accounts as I could, and then see what that added up to.
Yeah.
That was difficult. It was a very time-consuming process.
Absolutely. Well, it's just an extraordinary book. For any listeners who have not read it, just strongly, strongly encourage you to read it.
Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you.
We'd like to shift gears to just how you think about leadership. We are a leadership-focused podcast, and you have been an incredible leader in your industry in journalism. Could you talk about how you think leadership in journalism is unique compared to perhaps other industries?
Well, in a way, I guess it is unique just because of the deadlines that you face. You have to do things in a hurry, so you need somebody competent who can stand up to pressure. There are examples that I can think of, guys like Marty Barron, who was editor at the Boston Globe and then the Washington Post, and he was so well regarded because of his, not because he was aggressive tendencies, which you see in a lot of news coverage today, but because of his character. I think it's really important to have a leader that you can go to and they'll try to do the right thing, and they'll say, well, yes, we could do that, but it would be wrong. And I think that's important in any industry that you're dealing with important issues, that it's important to have somebody who says, well, we could do that, but it's wrong. And people would trust them because of their character. So I character, number one, competence, know what you're doing, and courage. Be willing to do something and take the heat for it. And again, I think of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yeah,
you can't have more character and courage than I think that she evidences. But a lot of editors face that day to day, the many decisions that you have to make. I can't tell you how many times I would pick up the phone when I was an editorial page editor, and the person on the phone, the first thing they would say is, "You idiot," or "How dare you?" And sad to say, today you wouldn't just get that. Somebody would threaten your life, probably.
Right.
So the stakes have gotten even higher, but we still need to have people in today's very fast world, and with print journalism declining in electronic media, it's faster. Everything's fast. And so have to have a good foundation and know what you're doing,
right.
I think. But leadership, it all comes back to character, I think.
Yeah.
Quiet character.
Yeah. So you have also been an incredible community leader. Could you tell us about just some of your community involvements, how you decided to get involved in those particular roles?
Yeah. There's an old maxim that on a newspaper, you should never be more than 30% ahead of your readership, your community, or 30% behind. So you need to know where your community is and how you're reflecting them and how you're covering them. And I think that rule of thumb is still good today.
Absolutely.
If I can go back to your previous question about
Sure.
leaders, I did think there were people in the book who were good leaders, like Captain Fannin, the head of the burglary department. All the policemen that I could find and talk to talked about what a good leader he was and how much they respected him. And your employees don't always respect their boss, particularly in a job like that, which is really tough. But they respected him, and what he would do is he would tell his detectives, the other officers of that rank and the Dallas policemen at that time, they wore cowboy hats and string ties and boots. And he told them, I want you to look like a professional. And they had to have a suit. And most of these were people who came from rural backgrounds, had never had a suit
right
before. They had to go buy a suit at Sears or in a flea market, some of them told me. But he wanted them to look professional and be professional. They wore a hat, they wore a suit. They looked like the cast of Dragnet, the old TV cop show. And then he would tell them, be professional, thank people for their time. If you go and they're not there, leave them a note, tell them you were there, that you would like to come back and talk to them. So I thought he set a very high standard for them, and they they responded. It was one of the best burglary departments in the country. And I think it's because he made them feel proud of themselves, that they were professionals. And I think that's good advice for anybody, make your people feel proud of what they do. I think it was Mary Kay said, imagine that everybody you deal with has a sign around their neck that says, make me feel valued.
Oh, wow.
Isn't that good advice?
That's wonderful.
I think that Captain Fannin did that.
Yeah. So you have also broken many barriers for women in journalism. So among others, you were the first female reporter at the Associated Press's Dallas Bureau and the first female editor at the Dallas Morning News. And then in 1987, Texas Monthly named you one of the most powerful women in Texas. Could you talk about just what that has kind of meant to you? How do you mentor other women in journalism?
Yeah. There is a glass ceiling. I was the first editor. I was the first editorial page editor. That was difficult. For most of my career, I was usually the only woman in the room. And that has certain responsibilities the old adage about Ginger Rogers having to work as hard as Fred Astaire, but in high heels. And I think that's true of women who early on were at the forefront of making change. Just one of the funniest things, I learned if you're in a room full of men, they're all going to say, how about those cowboys? And I had to come up with an answer because I'm not necessarily a sports person. And so I learned that the camaraderie of operating in that world. But it is true. I think for the women of that era in the 60s and the 70s, you had to work harder. You had to work harder and prove your competency so that they thought you'd earned it and keep on. But I did try to mentor quite a few young women. I hired women. I certainly wasn't the last woman on the editorial page. And also when I worked on or volunteered to be on community boards and outreach as part of that effort, to be in touch with the community and know what they were thinking, what they were saying. It was just invaluable, but I would always recommend women and people of color to serve on those boards.
Absolutely.
And bring as many people in so that they had a diverse representation. And I think that's one of the most important things that you can do is to have different voices in the room, not just an echo chamber.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What are you most proud of in your career?
In my career, I guess that I'm still standing after all those calls of people saying, you idiot. No, I'm most proud really not just of my career, but of my sons. I have two wonderful sons, both Eagle Scouts, both family men, and I would put that at the top of my resume. I really would.
So you've had huge success with King of Diamonds. What is next? Do you have any projects you have your sights on?
I do. Because it turned out to be such a complicated story with many levels, just like of crime. There was not just a level of gambling crime. A lot of the suspects gambled, the victims gambled, the police gambled. Then there's another layer with the mafia, then another layer, the Dixie Mafia, the Southern Thugs. And then there was another layer of people operating in Dallas that were doing things people ought to know about. And people probably didn't know about what was going on in most of those layers that I mentioned. And so the book grew. I think my next to last manuscript was 730 pages, space and a half. So really double space, that'd be about 1,000 pages. I'm embarrassed to even say it. And I knew I had to cut it. One of my sons said, Mother, nobody's going to read it. So I struggled to cut it. It was really hard. Yeah, you probably know just cutting is harder than writing. It's really hard. And so I hired a woman who was an editor in New York at several big publishing houses to help me see it with fresh eyes and how to cut it. And so with her help, I had to cut it nearly in half.
Imagine, my gosh.
After all that research. So essentially, the bad news is I had to cut it in half. The good news is I have another book left over. So after all that time of weaving some of this information into the story, I had to unweave it. And now I'm in the process trying to reweave it back together into something that's almost a follow-up, but different.
Well, I cannot wait.
Yeah, the operating title is The Invisible Men.
Okay. Well, I'm intrigued and excited.
Good. That's what I like. Granny needs new shoes.
So, what continues you to really be driven to identify new stories?
Yeah, well, like I say, it's like catnip to me to have something that can't be figured out or isn't known. The business about being a detective at heart keeps me engaged. There's some people who are talking about making a movie or a streaming thing out of the King of Diamonds. I hope they do, because who knows what information that will flush out. There already been people who come up to me after the King of Diamonds come out, will tell me things that I wish I'd known when I did the book. But there's just plenty there. There's plenty of catnip out there.
Right.
So as long as I can, I'm going to keep going for it.
Absolutely.
Because I want that man to come back up to me and say, why are you still doing this? Because it's fun. It's exciting.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Well, we have one question that we ask to all of our guests on Learning from Leaders, which is, who has been a leader or a mentor in your life who has really helped shape how you think about leadership and how you've gone about your career?
Mm-hmm. Well, I had a high school journalism teacher, Ed Cole, who was a former newspaperman, and he would make me come in on my lunch hour and practice writing news stories and feature stories and headlines. And I just hated it because my friends, were in the lunchroom or at the Dairy Queen and having a good time. And I was in there writing news stories. But Malcolm Gladwell is right that it's practice, practice, practice.
Right.
He said 10,000 hours. I don't think I did that much. But it gave me a really good foundation because I was later in situations that I had to write something very quickly, and I didn't have to worry about the order or the format. I knew it. It was baked into me. I also had an editor at the Standard Times when I worked there, and he took a real chance on me. I was the first woman to do that. I mean, he sent me out with the police to cover stories when I was a teenager. And so thanks to the generosity, really, I think, and vision, people opened the door for me. And I hope as I go along, I can do that for people too, to say, well, this has never been done before, but go for it. Go for it.
Yeah. Well, we have, just to wrap us up, a quick set of rapid fire questions.
Okay.
So just, whatever
the
first comes to mind.
comes out and I drop through the floor. Okay.
Okay. First question is, what's your favorite memory in Dallas?
Oh, in Dallas?
Yeah.
Let me think. Well, it might not sound like it, but after 9/11, and everybody was in shock. I had a son in New York then. My first concern was for him. But then I had an editorial page. I had an editorial team. And we had to respond right away in real time to say what happened. And our thought was, I was so proud of the people around me that we had to lead the community forward. And we had to do it really quick because the news put out a special edition for kind of a stop the presses moment. And we did. And I just remember it was wonderful because we all rode together. And that was great. Bad scene, but good.
Yeah.
Good follow-up.
What book are you reading right now?
Well, I'm reading a book about the mafia and the CIA and how they cooperated to try to kill Fidel Castro.
Oh, wow. What's the book called?
The Mafia Spies.
Okay.
I'm
going to check it out.
It's really good.
Okay.
I think you'd enjoy it. It's very meaty.
Yeah. Oh, I'm excited. What's your favorite vacation spot?
Oh, gosh. France. I did the 23andMe test, and it turned out I'm like half French and half Norwegian.
Really?
Yeah, Pederson's a Norwegian name. I just feel at home there. I mean, not to mention the food and the wine and the whole
of course
ambiance. When I was there recently, I went with a friend to a concert at the Église Sainte-Chapelle, which is all blue stained glass, and they played Vivaldi, and Ave Maria.
Wow.
And this singer, this opera singer, Fabienne Conrad, I'll never forget her name, a cappella, she walked down the aisle singing Ave Maria.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
I just get goosebumps. It
Wow.
was one of the most
That's
beautiful things in my life. So if you can capture those moments, that's great.
Wow.
That's my happy place.
Wow. So I think you might have answered this one, but most memorable interview that you've ever done? Or a couple of interviews.
Oh, yeah. Well, Julia Child was so amazing. I'd tried to call her for a long time. She was good friends with Paula Lambert, the mozzarella cheese owner here in Dallas. And I thought I was calling her secretary. Remember, her name was Stephanie. Called. Couldn't get her because she was 85 and she was still going around the world doing things. And one day I had a slow moment and I tried the number again. And she picked up the phone and she said, hello. I told her I was this woman in Dallas. I wanted to include her in my book, What's Next? And she said, well, have at it. Have a go. You've got me.
It's an excellent impression.
Yes, thank you. And she was just marvelous, and so that joie de vivre, that spirit, at life like that. Fidel Castro, this is going to sound odd, but I've interviewed a lot of dictators in my life, and most of them were very charming. You wouldn't think that, but that they were cunning, charming and cunning way. And Fidel Castro was like that. He's very tall, 6'2" or 6'3", and he was older. He was dyeing his beard this bluish blackish color. Maybe it's the only dye they had there. But I told him that I'd asked the cardinal what he thought about Fidel and if he had prayed for Fidel, because the clergy had been kind of quiescent in Cuba, not opposing his regime for probably understandable reasons. He said, yes, I pray for Fidel. So when I get up to Fidel, I asked him. He had talked for 4 hours. My hand was so tired, I ran out of space on my notepad. I got out my checkbook. I wrote on all my checks. And I thought, well, what can I ask him that's different from what we spent 4 hours on? And I asked him, I said, the cardinal says he prays for you. Do you pray for anybody? And he looked taken aback. He had gone to a Jesuit school, and he said, well, yes. He said, I think positive thoughts for them. Isn't that the same thing? And I said, well, not exactly. But he said that the Jesuit priest had told him when trying to describe what hell was that it was like a big mechanical ball bearing, and there's this mechanical bird, and he has to just sit there and keep pecking at that ball over and over and over again to the end of time without cease. And he said that image has never left me. So here was a man who had been responsible for killing thousands of people and was still holding his country hostage. So he had a lot on his conscience that I thought, I bet he's got that image in his mind somewhere. But that was very memorable. Just that image of the ball bearing sticks with me.
Yeah.
It is.
What music or band are you listening to right now?
Well, I like Vivaldi, actually. I like to listen to it in my car. Yeah.
Is there a story that you always wanted to cover but maybe didn't get the chance to, or is still hopefully down the road?
Well, I've interviewed a lot of presidents, 4 or 5, and that's always interesting to just see history in the flesh. But I haven't the last couple of presidents, so it would be fun, whoever the next president is, to do an interview with them.
Absolutely.
Maybe they like mysteries.
Maybe.
Yeah. Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
I could send them a copy of The King of Diamonds.
Sure, they'd love it. When do you think we might be able to expect a King of Diamonds movie or TV show?
I'd mentioned there are a couple of producers who are actively, as they say, shopping it. But my agent told me, he said, don't buy your dress yet, Rena. So
I can't jinx it.
I'm not counting on that. It would be it'd be really exciting to do. Yeah, but I figure I'll be an octogenarian then, probably. And I thought, well, why not? Why not? Yeah. So we'll see. Stay tuned. Will you have me back?
Of course.
Okay.
You can come back anytime.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, Rena, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was so wonderful to get to talk to you, learn about your career and your leadership advice and all things King of Diamonds. We so appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Lily. Your questions were all great.
Thank you. And to all of our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed the episode and can't wait for you to join us next time.
Thanks for listening to Learning from Leaders. If you enjoyed this episode, we invite you to subscribe now for monthly episode drops so that you can continue to learn from experienced business and community leaders to help you drive meaningful change in your community.